Good afternoon. I want you to picture the scene. It's the 25th of January, 2008. And I'll never forget the date because on the 25th of January, 2008 was to be my daughter's 13th birthday. So she was turning 13 on the 26th of January, 2008. So you can imagine what it was like in our household on the evening of the 25th of January, 2008. Here's this young girl who at midnight on the 25th of January, 2008, will go through a rite of passage. And the rite of passage that she's going to go through is she's going to go from being a young girl to becoming a teenager. So you can imagine how much excitement, energy, anticipation, and enthusiasm there was in our household on the evening of the 25th of January, 2008. And then at midnight on the 25th of January, 2008, I wake up with the most massive panic attack. Now, I had never, ever experienced a panic attack in all my life. Never. And so you can imagine what I'm thinking is happening to me. And what I think is happening to me is that I'm about to have a heart attack. And so I bump my wife in bed and I say to my wife, Deb, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And she says, why? And I try to explain why. And she asks me, have I got any pains or aches in my arms or my legs or my chest? And I say, no. And so she says, well, maybe you should get up and walk around the room and start to take a deep breath and see what happens. And so I get up and I walk around the room and I start to take a deep breath. In fact, I can feel that sense of anxiety right now. And as I take these deep breaths, so the level of anxiety and panic begins to subside. I get myself back into bed, but I can't go back to sleep. And I can't go back to sleep because all I do is I lie in bed and I catastrophize. And I catastrophize, and I catastrophize. I wake, and I lie there. At about 3 that morning, I go into the bathroom. I look into the mirror, and on the inside of my mouth is a sore. And I look carefully at the sore. I get back into bed. And I convince myself for the next 4 or 5 hours that I now have the beginnings of throat cancer. And I catastrophize about how am I going to deal with throat cancer? How am I going to deal with maybe not being the father and seeing my daughters grow up and get married? And at about 7:30 on the morning of the 26th of January, guess who comes running into our bedroom with lots of energy and excitement? My 13-year-old. And all I can do is I can say to my wife, Debbie, please just get her out of here. I cannot stand the levels of excitement, the noise, and all I want to do is I want to get rid of that noise, and all I want to do is take the duvet and pull it over my head and stay in bed. And so Debbie takes the girls out of the room. They go and open their presents somewhere else. She takes them to school and gets home at about 10:30, and where am I? Still in bed. Unable to find the energy, the desire, the enthusiasm to get out of bed. By about 11 o'clock that morning, she's eventually convinced this alpha male South African, you know them, to go to a doctor. Why should I go to the doctor? I've got no aches, I've got no pains, I'm not nauseous. Why should I go and see a doctor? But 11:30 that morning, I'm in the doctor's rooms and he asks me all sorts of weird questions about my levels of confidence, about my ability to think clearly, about my weight, about my sleep patterns. He asks me, have I had any suicidal thoughts? And I answer, yes. And then he says, have you planned it? And I say, not yet. And he then turns to me and he says, Geoff, you are ill. And I look at him and I say, I'm ill? I'm ill with what? You haven't even taken your stethoscope and listened to my heart or my chest. You haven't looked down my throat or in my ears or in my eyes. What am I ill with? And he says, you are suffering from anxiety-fueled depression. Now, up until about 11:30 stroke 12 o'clock on the 26th of January 2008, I had no understanding of the word depression. In fact, my understanding of the word depression was probably best described by waking up on a Saturday morning, as this often happens in the UK, and it's pouring with rain outside, and all I want to do is go for a bike ride. And I turn to my wife and say, I'm depressed because it's raining. That was my understanding of the word depression. And guess what? On the 26th of January, 2008, I get diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. As I leave the doctor's rooms, I make a decision that saves my life. I make a decision that saves my life. And the decision that I made was to talk about my illness. And the reason that that decision saved my life was because in talking about my illness, what I got in return from everybody that I spoke to was an unbelievable sense of how much I was loved. And you know, during those dark days of and weeks when I was recovering from my illness, there were dark, dark moments. And the only thing that kept me alive was knowing how much I was loved. Over a period of about 3 months, I get myself better through a combination of factors: cognitive behavioral therapy, medication, slowly getting back onto my bicycle, speaking to a friend every sort of 2 weeks who 2 years prior had been so ill that he'd been admitted to hospital. And I used to meet this guy and I saw he was better. And I kind of thought, wow, I can get better. He gave me hope that I could get through this. And so over a period of about 3 months, I get myself better. I go back to work. In 2010, I have a bit of a relapse, nothing as bad as 2008. And then in October of 2012, I'm walking home one evening and my telephone goes. And I answer my phone, and it's my wife on the end of the phone, and she says to me, Geoff, I've got terrible news. And you can imagine what my first question is. Are the girls okay? And she says, yes, the girls are fine. But your friend is dead. said, what? How? And he'd committed suicide that afternoon. And here was a guy, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. He brought so much light, love, and energy to people's lives, and now he was gone. And I lay in bed that night, and I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a psychologist, but I lay in bed that night, and I thought to myself, what is the difference? Here I am in 2012, learning to recover and living a life, a full life, but learning to live with my frailties and vulnerabilities around depression. And I'm enjoying life, and he's dead. And I come to a simple conclusion that night, and the conclusion that I come to is that stigma has just killed my friend. Stigma has just killed my friend. And that can't be fair. That can't be fair. That we can live in a world today, 2012, the 21st century, where we're talking about artificial intelligence, where we are talking about driverless motor cars, where we've put men and women on the moon, yet we cannot talk about our mental illness. And so it led me on a path which is so purposeful. My life today is so purposeful. And my purpose is really, really simple. I just want to create a world where everybody, in every workplace, all over the world, feels that they genuinely have the choice to put their hand up and ask for help if they are suffering from a mental illness, like depression, anxiety, or bipolar. I just want everybody in every workplace, everywhere in the world, to feel they genuinely have that choice. And why? Because in every workplace, everywhere in the world, everybody feels they genuinely have that choice if they are suffering from a physical illness. So why not if we are suffering from a mental illness? Why not? Why not? And as I journey this path of a purpose-led life, I've learned a couple of things. And the one thing that I've learned in order to maintain and enhance and keep myself mentally healthy, I've learned the importance of maintaining my well-being. And my well-being is made up of my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health, and whether I've answered the question that Mark Twain posed to us, the two most important days in your life, what are they? The day you were born and the day you find out why. Why? And you know, when we were at school and when we were at university and even in organizations today, all we're interested in is the physical aspects. And looking and understanding how do we maintain our physical health. But we now know that it's so important to also maintain our emotional health. How do we manage our feelings? What I've learned is that one of the most important things for me in managing and keeping my feelings healthy is self-compassion. Learning to be compassionate to myself. Learning to make myself happy. Not the rest of the world, but myself. Learning practices. You know, I think it was my mother who taught me dental hygiene. Guess what? My teeth haven't fallen out. Nobody ever taught me mental hygiene. Nobody. And so now learning practices around meditation, mindfulness, yoga, and answering that question, why was I born. And so some of those aspects I think are really, really important as we begin to look after our overall well-being and our mental health in what is a hugely anxious and demanding world. But what about the workplace? How do we begin to really break the stigma of mental ill health in the workplace? And in order to do that, I'm learning that there are 4 things that need to be in place. The first is we need leaders. We need influential people to tell their stories. To tell their stories. It was amazing to see how many people stood up in this room. I wonder how many of you have told your story. Have told your story. So we need leaders to advocate. We need leaders to invest in training everybody around mental health. Do you know in organizations, over the years, we've spent billions in health and safety. Guess what? It's all gone to safety. The time has come for us to invest in the health and the energy of our people. We need to shift the narrative around mental health. The narrative around mental health is so negative. When I use the word mental health, people immediately go to the negative. They go to depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. When I use the word physical health, people don't immediately go to glandular fever, cancer, diabetes. If I walk into a Nike store, I see the most beautiful chiseled whippets all over the walls, and I feel inspired to maintain my physical health. What are the images you see around mental health? Geoff McDonald with his hand in his head, some black and white photograph. There is nothing inspirational or aspirational about maintaining our mental health, our mental fitness, our mental hygiene. And you know, I think if organizations can get this right, if we as individuals can get this right, can take a more holistic view of looking after and seeing mental health as an advantage and as something that gives me energy so that I've got the capacity, I've got the passion to be able to change the world. Because you know what it's like when you've got energy and you've got passion. And so hopefully this afternoon, what I've done is I've done a couple of things for you. Hopefully what I've done is I've given you a sense of why am I so passionate about living this life on purpose? Why am I so passionate about that? Hopefully I've shared with you 1 or 2 small snippets of what I'm learning along the way as I live this life on purpose. And finally, I hope that I might have just provoked, inspired, some of you in this room to go out and to tell your story. Because you know that every single story that we tell, every story we tell is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean. And those that are suffering in silence cling onto that lifeboat and realize that they might just be normal. Thank you.